I started Training Beta in 2012 to provide people with all kinds of resources about training for climbing. We offer expert advice on how to get stronger, braver, and more skillful in your climbing with all kinds of offerings. We have climbing coaching with Alex Steiger and Matt Pincus. We have online training programs for route climbers and boulderers. We have nutrition coaching with me, as well as a nutrition online course for climbers. We have mindset coaching for climbers with me, and we have injury rehab programs from Jared Vagey. We have hundreds of blog posts and hundreds of podcast episodes, and you can find all of it at TrainingBeta.com. This is the Training Beta Podcast, and I'm your host, Neely Quinn. Thanks for joining me for another episode all about climbing training and all things climbing. Today, we're going to be talking with Steve Bechtel, and he is the founder of climbstrong.com. That was around even before Training Beta was around. He was actually one of my inspirations for creating Training Beta. I have been collaborating with him since 2014 when he was my 7th guest on the Training Beta podcast. And I actually listed out all of the episodes that he's been on. This will be his 6th. And he's just a wealth of knowledge, and he's a very soothing presence to be around. He's very just lots of wisdom from this guy. So we were chatting and we were like, we should do an episode on the things that have changed in the decade since we first talked. So that's exactly what we did here. We talked about how his training philosophies have changed in the last 10 years, how he thinks things are going to go for the next 10 years, and how his own climbing training has changed in the last 10 years. He's going to give you all kinds of details. I'm not going to belabor this intro here. I'm just going to let you listen to Steve. So you can find him at climbstrong.com, and I will talk to you on the other side. Enjoy. Okay. Welcome back to the show, Steve. How are you?
I'm good, man. This is so exciting. It's funny that that we just sort of happened into this because somebody messaged me a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, I was listening to an old podcast from Training Beta, and I want to know what you've changed your mind on in the past 10 years." And I was like, "Oh my God." And so that's when I texted you, and I was like, "I can't believe it's been more than 10 years." And then we were like, "Hey, let's do an episode." So I'm really psyched. It's fun to get to chat. Yeah. So it is funny, like what's changed in the past 10 years. I went back and listened to the episode, and I don't know if I'm normal or weird, but I don't like going back and listening to interviews with myself.
I don't think you're weird at all.
Okay. And so it was a little bit strange, but it was almost more of a nostalgic thing for me. So it was fun. I listened to it last week. I was driving down to Salt Lake, and I'm just so psyched to be chatting again.
Yeah, I was looking back at our first interview. Okay, so I want to preface this by saying that when I started Training Beta in like 2012, 2013, whatever, you and Eric Hurst were basically the only people talking about training, not the only, but the main ones. And you were the only person who had like an online training program of any sort. And so that's why I felt like, okay, well, there's room for Training Beta in this space. And I like really respected you and revered you for your wisdom. I like was a member of your program for a while. I was like, oh, I'm going to talk to him and get him on the show. And then we did several interviews. People love you. And so first of all, I just want to say, like, pay my respects to you. You're like one of the first, fathers of the training world. So thank you for like everything that you have contributed to this.
Oh, thanks. And it's funny. I think that once in a while, like you need to look at your life and go, oh man, I'm super lucky for these things. And one of the things that I've been really lucky in is that I was just really interested in getting better. And I had a series of mentors and people that influenced me when I was young that had that um, trajectory, and I could see it happen. And when man, training is super cool because it works. And there's so many things that we try in our lives and they might or might not help us. And you're not sure if it's working. And man, if you get into the gym and you start training and you're doing it properly, it works every single time. And I just love that. And so then I just got into it, and it's been a really great life.
Yeah, right. And back then you were like I think you were a one-man shop, and now you have like 87 coaches working under you.
Yeah. So when we talked in 2014, I did have the Climb Strong blog and the membership site, um, and um, and Charlie Manganello worked with me at the time, and he had originally started working at our gym and was a trainer there. And then as I got busier with some coaching and stuff at Climbstrong, he came on and did more and more of that stuff. And he's actually still with us as a Climbstrong coach. Um, and we have 19 coaches on staff now. And then Ellen does all of the management work, and then the our director of operations is a guy named Zach Snavely, and he does all the hard, like decision making and planning and stuff like that. So
And then so what do you do at this point?
the plan was for me to just basically be chilling at the crag,
Yeah.
but no, I do most of our internal coach education. I do most of our programming. I write articles and books and scripts for YouTube videos, and then I still, we still run the gym, and so there's a fair amount of work there as
Yeah.
well. So yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, good job growing it. I mean, yeah, it's a
Well,
force.
it's interesting because you have this opportunity to stop and say, like, if I'm going to just keep it simple and just be myself, I'm going to be able to serve 20 athletes. And then as try to grow your career or whatever, you're just like, I need to charge those 20 athletes more dollars each. Um, and then the other option was what we decided to do, which was to teach more coaches the methods and principles that we use, and then open up the coaching to them. And it's really awesome because they're in so many ways way better coaches than I could ever be. And we try to take away the hassle of the business side and the programming side for them, so they can focus on communicating with their athletes and really doing the coaching part of it rather than the business part of it, which isn't that cool sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we have like similar businesses, except that I have two coaches and no gym and
And a podcast, which I
and a podcast.
can't imagine doing.
Yeah, right. Um okay, so what we're going to talk about today is kind of the differences between what you were talking about 10 years ago versus what you're basically teaching your coaches now and writing about now. And you went back and listened to an episode or two, and so I have some questions for you, but we'll just start with, what do you think is like, what have you noticed has changed over the last 10 years in terms of climbing training?
Well, here's the one of the biggest things, and I just got done with a management team meeting right before we got on here. And the management team at Climbstrong meets once a week, and it's a 90-minute meeting, and it's all about what we're trying to do that week, big projects, things like that. Our high performance director and our coaching manager is a guy named Ken Klein, and you know Ken, and he listened to our first interview while he was sitting at his desk at New Belgium in Fort Collins. And he was a youth coach at the time, wanting to get into coaching more people one-on-one. And he talked about how he was just scribbling notes, and thought it was all this really great stuff. A few years later, he went to the first performance climbing coach seminar that you and I did in Lander, and got super psyched. We became good friends. He's after Charlie and Alex, he was the next coach that we hired at Climbstrong, and now he coaches, I don't even know, 30. He coaches more athletes than any other coach I know of. Does it full time, and so in a lot of ways, he, I think, is the first true full time climbing coach that just makes money from being a coach. He's not being paid a salary from a gym. He just coaches individual athletes, so that's a big change for me. That's what's changed since then, is that these great relationships have come on. Lots of people in the coaching space, but I think the biggest change is when you and I first talked, there wasn't very much information on training, and people were really seeking it out. And now there's a ton of information about training, and it's hard to sift through. There's so much information coming that people don't know what to do. I love that Derek Sievers said, if more information were the answer, we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs. And
Yeah.
and that's really where we are in the climbing space now. And so a lot of what I keep trying to do is to, help people kind of pull back from, following influencers or following just scientific papers, and trying to take a little bit more global look at what really works to help us improve in the sport.
Yeah, that's exactly how I think of you, because you have your monthly newsletter, which I always read, and you're always trying to get us to think critically, don't and not be dumb, and not like glom onto fads or like get too caught up in the details, and just like continue doing the work, in
Mm-hmm.
which I've really appreciated, and I think a lot of people appreciate about you. So,
Well,
and it's funny because like even I, as a person who's interviewed like almost 300 people about climbing training, I was in the gym the other day, and my friend was like, "So after all these interviews, do you feel any closer to knowing what to do in here?" And I was like, "No, I'm like way more confused now."
yeah, yeah. Well, it's really interesting, because we are starting to see a reflection of what general fitness has experienced for a long time, where you're getting sold on, you know, programs to do at home, or things on late night TV, like that'll tone your abs or whatever, and it's just starting. We don't quite have like these hucksters in climbing that are just trying to get your money quite yet, but right now you're like, man, do I need this thing, is this going to be magical for me? And the answer is no. There's nothing magical. And the biggest thing, the most important thing that all climbers need to remember, is that 90% of progress is really, really simple stuff. And then the 10% is the stuff that's the most interesting to us. And that's it's how it is in so many fields, but it's really important to go back and say, showing up regularly at the gym, continuing to follow basic training principles like overload and recovery, um, and staying with the idea that this is a long-term thing, and anything that promises us fast results is somebody trying to steal your money. So
Mhm. Yeah. So before we started recording, one of the things you said was we were talking about how now both of us actually have people coming to us who want to coach, and they haven't been climbing for more than even like a year. And they have big goals, and they understand that like getting a coach is going to be a useful tool with that. Where I think, and I even got an email from a person last week who was like, I worked with Alex, one of my coaches, and I was climbing 513 at the time. And I thought that I needed to be climbing 514 before I even got a coach. And so
mhm.
I think that that mentality has changed over the past 10 years. What do you think?
Yeah, I think seeking out advice and coaching is a super wise move because we don't know what we don't know. And so often when you find somebody and you tell them your story and you say these are the things I've tried, um, very often they'll ask you something very basic that you maybe haven't tried, and you're like, gosh, I didn't really consider that. And they're going to see simpler solutions to your problems, because if you've got these problems right in front of you, it's very, very hard to see your way through. We especially tend to collect these non-negotiables, like, um, I built a moon board in my garage and therefore I need to use it all the time, right? Or I love hangboarding. I saw really good results 5 years ago, and I just need to do more of it so that I can see even more results like that. But we get into these patterns that tend to lead us the wrong direction. And so having a coach or an advisor, or even just somebody that you check in with really rarely, is super useful. And that actually is more of what I do these days. With the Climb Strong team, I don't do regular monthly coaching. The majority of our coaches are seeing their athletes once a month, once every 2 weeks, or even once a week. And I tend to meet with people once every 6 months, and they are really dialed on their climbing. And I'll say, what if we tried this and this and this? And then we are just directing them. But even people that are really high level, super experienced athletes, they need just to have a little bit of feedback.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you're working with not only the pretty probably experienced climbers, but like with a long training life too, like a high experience with training.
For sure. And it's really interesting, as you've seen it before, where somebody did a particular plan. They did the Anderson brothers rock prodigy plan, and they saw tremendous results. And then they did it again the next year, and they saw okay results. And then the next year it kind of went flat. And that's how adaptation happens. And so what we try to do with any of these athletes that are some of them 30, 40, 50 years into their training, like, well, what if we tried this? What if we approached it slightly differently? And really, it's a lot of creativity, but it's also just a lot of helping that person step back and take a little bit more, bird's eye view of their processes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so often it's simple stuff like resting a little bit more between boulder problems, or changing set and rep schemes, um, reconsidering how they structure a climbing weekend, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like for me, last year I had a huge increase in my climbing just simply because a friend of mine was like, "You're spending too much time training. You need to just go try hard on rock climbs."
Yeah.
Because I was just working at a sub max level all the time on climbing, and it really helped. So it's like an outsider's opinion.
Yeah, and it's not like the same advice works for everybody, but when it comes down to coaching and getting specific advice, it should be really tailored to you. Um, One of the things that we've always, like all coaches ever, have tried to figure out is, how do I build a template that I can apply to multiple athletes? How do I build the How to Climb 513 program? But the second that you build that program, there's somebody that comes in that's exceptional. Um, we have classes that we run at the gym, and there'll be 10 people working out in the class together, and the class is on a template, but almost everybody in that class is having to do some kind of modification. My wrist doesn't work here. I don't have the ability to do this particular thing, but you need to go in and find those modifications for each of those people. And so then when it comes to personal coaching online, the second I start into my normal template and I'm like, oh, wait, you don't have a moon board in your garage, then I don't know what to do with you. So
Yeah, right.
it becomes really challenging. So,
Yeah, totally. So these are all like general climbing training concepts that we're talking about. And I think that if I title this podcast episode, How Things Have Changed Over the Last 10 Years, or things that Bechtel thinks differently about now than before, they're probably like, well, what does he think about how should I be training about with power endurance, or how should I be doing my fingers? And so I am curious if there is anything like that, because I know that you are a voracious reader. You
Mhm.
like look at the research.
Yeah.
You've had so much more experience working with people now. So I am curious, are there things in your advice to people that have changed over the years?
Um, yeah. So there's a few things. One is it's important to recognize an athlete's training age, and we talked about that just a little bit a second ago. But we generally will look at training age in three phases. Level one, level two, level three. And a level one person would be somebody that's been climbing or training for a very short amount of time. They haven't had a lot of inputs and overloads. And so there are a lot of things that can help that athlete get better. A level two athlete is where most of us end up, where, a weekly schedule that kind of repeats itself provides us with improvements. And then a level three athlete is somebody that's been doing it for a very, very long time and very close to their genetic limits. And they therefore need very, very specific training. A good example is I do a lot of skiing with my kids, and I'm a total like level two person there. I've skied for years and years and years, but I've never addressed it in a training way. I've never addressed my form. I've never addressed my conditioning. And so definitely a level two athlete there. In climbing, I can be a level three athlete because I've been doing it for a very long time, even though I'm not a climber at an elite level. So training age is really important, and it doesn't have a lot to do with your ability. Um, I just met with a woman that's a professional climber that has been climbing at the top level for many years. And I would still consider that a level one athlete because she's just climbed and she's done it for a very, very long time. She's very good, but hasn't done any progressive training, which is awesome because anything we do is going to be beneficial. And then, then at the far end, the level three athletes, they're very challenging. So that has changed.
That has changed in what way? Like just your knowledge of it?
Just my recognition of it, because I used to just assume everybody needed very, very specific training, and that's not really true. You can, if you're a level one athlete, let's start with like lots of variety, and you can do kind of a lot of things that might improve your ability to pull. They might improve your skills, things like that. With an advanced level athlete, it becomes real focused, and that's an important thing, is to not go and try to find advanced programs when you're a beginner just because you want to be advanced.
Right.
Do you know the guy Ramit Sethi? He wrote "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." He's like a
Yeah.
financial guy.
Yeah.
He said something that's similar to this. He said more people they Google advanced investing strategies way more often than they Google basic investing strategy, right? And so then you're like day trading, and looking at buying futures in something when really you just need to be saving a little bit of money. And so that's where we want to, like, if we aren't at that advanced level, we want to treat the athlete in the best way and keep it as fun as possible.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I'm really interested to dig in with this a little bit. If you have like a level 3 athlete in your mind and a level 1 athlete in your mind, can you give me like a broad overview of the differences of their programs?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a really good example. You're friends with Jonathan Siegrist, and
Yeah.
I advise him on his training, and what we've worked on for the last 2 or 3 years are a couple of specific shoulder position strengthening things and his ability to lock off just a little bit lower
Mhm.
on holds. And
And does
that
that look like on the wall stuff or in the weight room stuff?
both, but
Uh,
real focus. Like, and if you were first starting out as a climber and I said, okay, we're going to work on your ability to Gaston on the crimp on bibliography, and
right.
then we're going to work on your ability to take a block on a cable and pull it down below your shoulder. You'd be like, that's crazy. And, but Jonathan has a high level of strength, high level of ability, good tactics, all of the big rocks are taken care of. And so we work on these really specific things to goose one little more percent out. And
Right.
so the advanced athletes training is aimed at getting 1% better, where level one or a novice athletes training is aimed at getting 50% better. And so that athlete, we would do general strength training, go into the gym and do a lot of bouldering, have some fun, try all the angles, keep it very general, until we start to see specific limiters start to come forward.
Oh, you're like waiting for them to arise.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no reason you don't need to know your critical force when you're climbing 5'8". You just need to go climbing a lot more. And that's one of the things that's really important, is that we can't out train it. We can't out train the ability to just gain skill.
Yeah. Well,
And
that was going to be my another question too, is like, how much do you use testing and assessments now versus before?
yeah, I would love it if assessments worked really well, but they don't tell the whole story. One of our coaches, Joel Unima, built a really great battery of assessments, but we actually just call them screens, because we don't want people to get the idea that if you do this test, it means X. Like if you if you can do 11 pull-ups and pull 100 kilograms on a 20 millimeter edge, you should be able to climb 13B. That it might indicate that you have the strength for that, but it doesn't indicate maybe that you have the endurance for it, the movement repertoire, the tactics, the emotional stability, the mindset, all the other things. And so we use this big performance wheel in our coaching, where we kind of look at where these athletes are on a more global scale. Great example is the critical force test is awesome for. Have you done that test?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucks, right? And so
Yeah.
it's a really awesome like endurance test. Looking at your local muscular endurance in your forearm. What happens for a lot of level one, level two climbers, or a lot of all of us, is no matter how good our endurance is, if I'm afraid when I'm climbing, my physical conditioning isn't really the biggest limiter. There's really interesting research about the reduction in endurance capability in runners when they do a competition versus when they go training. And so they get these start line jitters, and they can have a decrease in their ability to uptake oxygen of like 10 to 15%, just because they're nervous about starting a citizen's 5K. They're not like 300 feet up a cliff looking at a 40-foot fall, right? It's like it's not that big a deal, and they have this huge reduction in the ability to have endurance. And so for climbers that are afraid, no amount of physical training is going to overcome the improvement you could probably make by addressing that fear a little bit more aggressively. You just can't get enough endurance to stop being afraid unless you're actually facing that one thing.
Yeah, that is crazy. And is that something that you have learned to put more emphasis on, is mindset and fear in climbing?
For sure. And I think it's definitely not my strong suit, but it is part of all coaching, where it can be I get nervous when I go into the gym and there's a bunch of crushers in there. It can be I don't like the way that my body looks when I'm out in front of people climbing. There's can be all kinds of things that are occurring there. And that's part of coaching, is to ferret that out and be like, how do we navigate this? Do we address it? Do we change the environment? Do we work on mindset with this athlete? And in general, unless that person is firing well on the emotional and mindset side and on the tactic side, the physical training isn't that important.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you learned specific things about how to address that and how you coach your coaches on that?
Well, the one of the most important things is I've learned to put experts in the driver's seat there. Um, for example, like when it comes to injury, I know a fair amount about climbing injuries and injury reduction, but it's much better for me to have a good network that I can then go, hey, I have this injured athlete. Will you talk to him? For example, AJ Sabrilski's a physical therapist that works for Climbstrong as a performance coach, but he's also a physical therapist. And so when we have somebody, any of the athletes that we coach have an injury that isn't easily solved or addressed by like, oh, let's take it easy for a couple of weeks, they can go to AJ and get a consultation. And then the same thing happens with a lot of this, the emotional and mental side of it. Is Alex Bridgewater, who's worked as a coach with me for years, has spent the last couple of years getting his master's degree in performance psychology, and so he's got a company where he does actual consultations for these athletes. And I'll just say, I'd like you to talk to Alex and see if he can help you. We can I know some of the exercises and tactics and things, and I can hand those to my athlete, but it's really important as a coach to stay within scope of practice and not go too far out. Same reason I don't prescribe, diets. Same reason I don't, tape ankles or whatever.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, that is a difference between 10 years ago and now. Like, you were doing it all or, trying to find somebody who you trusted to send people to, and now we are advanced enough as a sport that we're like, "No, we need professionals who specialize in this stuff."
Yeah. And I think that like we all understand that the physical development is an important part of it, and I've done a lot of time in the gym and in building endurance plans and things like that. But when it comes to it, you're like, boy, this person is not getting it together on this, or this person's continuing to get injured. Whatever it is, it's great to have the resources to go outside that.
Yeah.
To come back to that question, if fear is the issue, one of the main things is to get into the performance environment and see what's going on. One of the main ways that climbers try to address fear is to do a tactic called progressive desensitization, which is I'm going to go up and I'm going to fall,
Mhm.
and which isn't that cool if you're afraid, right? And it's really hard because you're like, I'm going to expose myself to the worst case. I'm going to expose myself to the worst case, and a lot of people can't get over that hump. And so one of the things that we like to do is to expose them to the performance environment, but at a less intense level. So if you're afraid of leading, we need to make an aggressive value statement first with the athlete and say, do I care about leading
Mhm.
routes? And is it a value? Is it part of who I am? And if it is, like I myself love to red point. And so that's a big part of my image, my self-image as a climber is I'm a red point climber, or I top boulders or whatever it is. And so then once I value that and I want to be good at it, then I can start to work on that. Like I need to be a person that leads routes. And so my first advice to people that are afraid to lead is to always lead, and like never take the top rope again. But let's reduce the intensity to where you can actually lead these things. And so we'll just get an athlete out there and say, go out and try to lead past 4 bolts, no matter how hard the grade is. So you can go to 5-3 at a crag, and I'm going to lead this, even though you can maybe climb V7. We're addressing a different thing. It would be like having weak back muscles and moving in and trying to address those muscles instead of doing the exercises you're really good at.
Mhm.
And so just getting the athletes to get in the habit of leading and being a red point climber and getting into the environment that they're going to be in, and not try to falsify that environment. Like you've been to crags where you're in like the pipe dream, and there's an athlete that's trying to top rope because they're afraid, and it's not the appropriate way to address that environment. It's not safe for that. It's a weird thing to do. It's not easy to unclip in the terrain, but we're creating this false sense of what the sport is like because we're not able to address the important things. So they still want to get a pump and get really, really fit, but they're not willing to address the main thing. It's like tuning up the engine and your tires are all flat. So
But then, like you said, there's a value question there because I have these conversations with my mindset coaching clients too, where you're like, do you want to lead? And some of them actually end up saying, no, actually, I don't care about leading.
yeah, which is perfect then, right? And then you can just be like, there we go. Now we don't have to worry about it. Now it's not an issue on the table.
Right. Yeah.
And it's important to understand that we're all like, if it's such a natural thing to have some arousal and some fear around climbing, and you talk to, I mean, you've had a lot more conversations than I have, but you talk to even the bravest or appearing the bravest or most accomplished climbers, and they're like, yeah, I was freaked out. That was scary. Dave McLeod talks about that a lot in Moving the Needle. Like, it's scary. I had to work on not being as afraid. And that's a big deal. And
Yeah.
an important thing. And a lot of people just assume that everybody else is brave and they're the only one that's chicken. So
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we're talking about, I keep coming back to like the differences, but the fact that you and I are talking about this for so long,
mhm,
that I think is a huge step forward for our sport to actually acknowledge that it is scary and not just try to push that under the rug or sweep it under the rug and understand that it does have such a big impact on our performance.
yeah.
So,
And attention, like, I think the other big thing that's changed in the last 10 years is people's ability to give the sport, give anything the attention that it deserves now. Our attention is so scattered. Um, and I think that that's one of the most important things about training and about climbing is that it lets you break loose of this like crazy madness that's going on in your pocket at all times with your phone. Um, it you know I I quit engaging with social media about 5 years ago.
oh
Um,
wow, good for you.
and we have a person on our team that's paid to do the Instagram posts, and um, I have a person that builds the YouTube videos and things. But one of the things that's was important to me there, and it's the same reason I don't read the news, is that there's a ton of information coming at you, and it's really hard to sort through it. It's hard to find out what's important. And along those lines is I don't need other people's messages coming at me all day long. It's really important for me to stop and like think for myself and create my own messages. And so if I can get away from the phone during training or while I'm out at the crag, it's a really important part of my day is to be able to break away from that. I mean, we all have phones, we all have bings and beeps and things coming through, but being able to push away from that and understand that it's not the real world, it's not that important, um, and then be able to engage with the people you're with. That's the thing I think that we all love about climbing. The um, yeah, when I'm climbing, I can't multitask, and that's really sick.
Yeah, it is.
So I love that about, like, if you and I go out to the crag, first pitch, we're climbing a warm up, and we kind of are chatting and we're kind of getting into our day. But as soon as we get onto something that's very difficult, it's like communication is business only. It's like, watch me here. Okay, this is hard, whatever. But it's not like, oh, and then I went to, there's not a lot of chit chat at that point.
And how do you think that's different now than 10 years ago with the attention?
I think that the demands for our attention are higher. The algorithms are getting better. The number of things that we have that you engage with that are requiring daily attention become really important. Like, for example, you probably pay attention to the number of followers that you have on any social media channel, right? And you're like, oh, there more people are following me than before. That's a good thing. Therefore, I'll keep being engaged with this. But if you're feeling like you need to engage with that all the time, and you're like, what happened? Oh, somebody quit. Why did they leave? And you're getting all these like micro doses of dopamine, and micro doses of like depression and anxiety and happiness and elation. And it's really really hard on our bodies. We're designed to pay attention, and historically human beings needed to be able to pay attention to anything that looked strange in the environment. Here's something dangerous. There's a snake in the grass. There's animals over on that hillside. And now we have all of these things that are coming at us. They're changing the colors so they're more appealing to us. They're changing the tones on the phone so that they're like more apt to go look at the phone. And so it's a challenging thing just to understand that we're commodities. We're not really using the phone as much as it's using us. And so I think that that's a wonderful part of what we do, is being able to break free of that and move forward on things that are important to us. Like I said, being able to climb instead of like getting hung up on the phone. And so that all comes around to, I think that we really need to set aside that time to get out to the crag, get outside, get into the quiet, or just get in the weight room and move around without diving back into particularly social media, but really, maybe avoiding having to engage with things in between. Like, you've probably done this where you're like, I'm working out in the basement, and then I got to check some emails in between, and then I'm going to go back and try to work out, and then I got to check some emails, and the going back and forth between those tasks is real challenging for us.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just like the amount of effort that it takes to actually be committed and spend the time necessary with climbing and actually enjoy it. It's more of a challenge now.
And let it be important. The thing that I think is really crazy is how we've decided that there's these certain things that are really important to our time, like work. I mean, obviously we need money, right? But work is like a non-negotiable for so many people. But then like climbing, it doesn't make you any money, but it is so important to our sense of well-being and identity that it's okay to prioritize it. It's okay to go, yeah, I am going climbing today instead of whatever, because I can totally work another 4 hours a day and make more money. And then what?
Right.
But if you're able to climb 4 more hours a day, the then what is really positive, or run or kayak or whatever it is you love to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really having a reckoning with that this year for sure. Like finally coming to a place where I'm like, wait, these are the things that are important to me. And I'm actually not on social media much anymore. And I don't know, you just come to a point where you're like, this stuff isn't important, and climbing is important. And I have so many clients who are like, it's just climbing. It doesn't matter. I don't even know why I get so upset about it. And I'm like, well, you're allowed to let it matter. Like you just said.
No, it's the dumbest thing. Like if you go, yeah, so grandma, I've saved all this money for the last 2 years, and then I'm gonna get on an airplane and I'm gonna fly across the world. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go just outside Paris into this forest. We're gonna climb up these like 8 foot high rocks. And we're gonna climb around all the different sides of them, and then we're gonna come back.
That's really funny.
No, but it's so ridiculous, but it's what we do. It's like we don't have to hunt and gather for food anymore, which is which which is a really important part of our ancestral upbringing, is that we had to strive and suffer and all those things. And we have obesity and this crazy amount of technology coming our way, and sloth, and we're overworking and all of these things because we don't know how to adapt to the modern world. And so I think climbing lets us go back to this like primal, like, I have a goal, I want to achieve that goal, and then I'm going to rest. And
Right.
so I
And
think
like the
it's
primal fear involved and the being outside and what's crazy and I think pertinent to this conversation, I'm reading this book I just read this book called Why We Need to Be Wild. And it's about this woman who rewilds herself, and she goes from the tech world to living in the forest and whatever. And she was like, get gathering food, it gives you these dopamine hits every time you get food.
Hmm.
And so social media gives us those dopamine hits that we used to get from gathering food. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, that is really ridiculous.
It makes sense though.
Totally. No, I think that's really interesting. I mean, one of my favorite things, like maybe the only thing I've ever liked near as much as climbing, is hunting,
Hmm.
and I think that that's part of it. Is like it's nice to be outside and doing all that stuff, but really like this like primal endeavor of like going out and finding the animals is really really important.
Well, yeah, I imagine there's a lot of peace and meditation and satisfaction and challenge and all of the things.
Well, and you have to be quiet, like you have to exist in the environment. Like we'll go mountain biking out in the hills here outside of town, and you're just like ripping down the thing, and you're like, you know, there, like you might see an animal or something, but you're not trying to be in any kind of harmony with the environment. And I just really like how there's so many tactics involved. You have got to be quiet, got to be lucky, got to all the things, and but it really feels like there's something beyond it that really matters. So
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm going to ask you some specific things about specific training things.
okay.
So, for instance, um, you wrote logical progression, and
Mhm.
it's funny because I was just in the gym overhearing a conversation about it. Dude, have you ever heard of this guy, Steve Bechtel?
That guy's an idiot. I hate that guy.
That's what he said. That's what he said. But I'm curious. I know that you've updated the book, but are there big differences between your first edition of it and the most recent?
Well, logical progression was simply a statement to let climbers know that programming didn't have to be that complicated. The first few texts that came out in climbing training went to Eastern periodization, which is simply like the programming of training over a long cycle. The problem with this Eastern periodization is it focused on single facets of physiology. I'm going to work on endurance, then I'm going to build some strength, then I'm going to build some power, and then I'm going to peak for this competition. And so we got into this mindset, we got kind of trapped into it where I need to work out for 5 months and then I need to take 2 weeks off and then I'm going to climb really, really well for 2 weeks and then I got to start over. And there were a few books like Dale Goddard's early book, some of Eric's early books that were like, "Yep, this is the way." And I started looking at, wait a second, I don't want to just climb well, twice a year for 2 weeks. How can I make this happen? So I started researching what's called nonlinear periodization, where with each training session we train the primary facets differently. So the first training session in a cycle would be focused on strength. The next one might be explosive power. The next one might be some kind of endurance. And then we'd start over. And that works extremely well with high skill sports because it's important to understand that climbing is such a high skill sport. There's so much skill component that the strength and conditioning component is very small. In classical periodization, it was really about powerlifting and Olympic lifting, where the strength component is huge and the skill component is relatively small once you get the basics of the sport. And so, yeah, the conditioning became a really big part of it. Works fine with the classical periodization model. And so, the second edition of the first edition of logical progression was here's nonlinear training. I talked to a lot of climbers and coaches after that, and really started diving into what's called block periodization after that. And so then I introduced that in the second edition. And block periodization is where, for most of a month, I might focus on finger strength and general, weight training, maybe 2 out of 3 sessions. In that third session, I might still address some power and endurance, but I'd stay with strength for 4 to 6 weeks with just a little bit of maintenance of the other facets. And then I'd move to another block, maybe a block of power. But with block periodization, there was always a maintenance day happening as frequently as needed. And that actually works really great for climbers that are trying to address specific things like, man, my upper body strength is really poor. I can't do a pull up. I always feel like my shoulders tap out. we can spend 4 weeks on that, maintain all the other stuff, like on a 1 day a week mini workout, and have really good success. And so that's really what happened with the second edition of it. And then I always hate like going there. I got a new one coming out because I don't want to like oversell. There's always like, hey, big news coming, people. But I have been sketching out a third edition, which would then talk about longer season cycles and for people that are traveling and climbing a lot and more of the specifics and just sort of updates. I think um, LP2 came out in 2020. And so I've got, I don't know, maybe another 50 or 80 pages of notes that are associated with that. But really it's like, let's build a climbing training program that fits in your life. And the first thing we do, I'm teaching at the CWA in April, and I'm doing a half day pre-session that's all about program design. And that the program design starts with, what does your week look like? How much time do you have? Because if I open up my template and it says my basic 513 climbing program requires 13 hours a week and Neely's got 6, what is she supposed to do? And so we always start with what time do you have? And
And
so, yeah.
is
So
that different than how it started?
well, the thing is a lot of people have these ideals on like, oh, I read this book and now I need more time. So I'm not going to do my share of house chores and I'm not going to take care of my kids anymore because, I read this book and I need 13 hours. Uh, and so really where we start with any athlete is like, what have you been doing? Because sometimes there's this hope like this is going to be the year. I'm in my mid 40s and this is when I'm really going to hit it hard for the first time. And the number one result of doing a program like that is injury. And so we want to really avoid that, and we want to make sure we start with what you've been doing. So if you were starting a new training program, what we would do is say like, what have you been doing? How many hours a week and at what intensity? And then we can try to improve on that. But we don't want to just start out by doubling it. If you were 16, I might get away with it. But when you're 30, when you're 35, when you're 40, when you're 45, it doesn't work that well anymore. And so it's really important that we start with the workout that you're doing, the things you love about it, and then we start to make small modifications to help you optimize that workout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. It seems like over the years, you've just come more to like, it depends on the individual and how can we make this enjoyable so that it's sustainable for you, which has kind of always been your ethos, but it seems like you've just like honed that even more.
So we started out, I said 90% of improvement comes from pretty simple things. And so and that involves the individual. But if we're going to build a plan, there's kind of these 6 main things that go into a successful training plan, and a lot of people ignore these. And so the first thing is to build a vision. Like what are the things that I would like to get done? And part of vision building isn't like dreaming big. It's being realistic. Like, what have you done in the past? What, what things came up against your preparation that stopped you? I got super psyched. Great example. We have a fixed board at our gym. I love it. It's really fun to boulder on. Every time I overdo it on there, my elbows start to hurt. Right. And so I'll like the next year start planning out my cycle, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to hit it. I'm going to do these 2-hour sessions. And if I step back and I take that little more overhead look, I'm like, oh, that's going to hurt my elbows. And so I need to make a little bit of a change there. And so building this vision as being realistic, but also trying to push your boundaries a little bit. And that was part of, we discussed this right before we got on the call, where somebody's like, yeah, I just started climbing and I'm psyched to do free rider. And you're like, okay, so let's start by trying to climb one climb on granite and see if you like that. And then we'll build from there. But really having some flexibility in the visioning. So the first thing is to build out this vision of what you want. And then the second thing is to plan your preparation. And this is an interesting thing because a lot of people don't take this step. but really like plan it out and say, these are the things I would like to get done. These are the things in my schedule I can't move. I have a vacation coming up or whatever. These are the hours I can train in my available facilities. Some people have really strange work hours and that they aren't able to go to the gym at certain times. And so planning that out and then to execute the plan. So to execute the plan would be the third bit. So the third main habit is to actually go out and do the thing. This is a really critical thing. And this has been a frustration for you. I'm sure it's frustrating for me. People will start a 12-week plan. They'll do it for a week and they'll be like, yeah, that didn't work. I'd like to try a different plan. I mean, there's a reason 12-week plans are 12 weeks long. It's not because there's 12 weeks of the same first week overload. It's because it takes 12 weeks to do this thing. And so many people hear a new podcast or they see an Instagram post and they're like, oh, I'm changing my plan now. I'm changing it again. I'm changing it again. And you've probably seen it with diet where they're like, oh, I'm keto, I'm paleo, I'm keto, I'm paleo, I'm carnivore, and they don't ever build a normal habit. And so what we really need to do is execute the plan, go through the full plan and make sure that we see it through to its fruition. A strength training plan doesn't usually show results for 8 to 12 sessions. And so it can take a while before that happens. And if you're bored with it, you're flitting around, you can't focus, that's the bigger issue. It's not really the plan.
Yeah.
So part 4 then, after we make the plan, is to make adjustments carefully. You got to go through the plan and don't just throw things out because they're not fun or they're boring or whatever, but you've got to have a really good reason. So when we make adjustments, we have to be really aware of them and not just stop them because they aren't fun. We need to be aware of injuries. We need to be aware of overtraining. We need to be aware of, are we underdoing it? Most climbers are super motivated, so they just want to adjust up. But many, many climbers that we work with do much better if we drop the volume of training and they're able to give a little bit more attention to less stuff. And so that's a really tough thing, but we need to make those adjustments really carefully. We need to be real aware and have reasons that we do those things. The fifth part, and these are all it's not like sets and reps. These are all this basic human habits, but is to perform when it's time to perform. The number of athletes that I run into that don't ever have a performance phase, they're always like fixing to get ready to get stronger. I'm still building my base, and they're always training up, thinking that somehow they're going to arrive at some Shangri-La. It's so high. So many people never perform. And so I'm like, man, when the training phase ends and the performance phase begins, you go out there and you be a rock climber. And it's super important because we get into this habit, and it sounds like you were there at one point where you're just training all the time, getting ready, whatever, but you're never actually doing the thing. And that's a really tough situation because training is easy. Training is so simple because you go to the gym and you do your training and you did it. And then when you go to the crag, you go out there and you've got the smackdown and you didn't send your project and you think you suck. But no matter what, every time you go to the gym, you're a winner because you're like, oh yeah, I did my workout, and that was the goal. And so we really need to move into this performance mindset. And then the last bit is to compile the lesson and start again. And so after we've done our performance phase, what worked, what didn't, did I send, did I not? The thing is we should all improve. We should all have a way forward. And unless you're really injured, unless you're getting really old, unless you really have no access to rock, there's almost always a way forward for somebody. And so then once we're past those basic lessons, then yeah, like sets and reps and stuff don't really matter all that much.
Well, do they not matter?
I think that even a crappy program, if you follow through and stay on some amount of progressive trajectory, is way better than like an ideal program that you only do for a week or two and then you move on to something else.
Yeah, for sure.
I love doing this. I love to recommend that people like take one exercise and they say, we're going to stick with this through the winter and I'm going to have you address this one particular thing. And that's where we've seen people with very simple hangboard program, they get ridiculously strong fingers, or these real low load, high volume programs where you're like, man, my deadlift went through the roof and I never lifted all that heavy. That's because we're focusing on something that we can do long enough for it to actually occur. It's the same as like investing. You're like, you open an investment account, you look at it the next day and you're like, nothing's happening. Right.
That's
But
a really great analogy. Yeah.
well, no, and that's the thing, is like, we expect results. We expect this like thing to have happened, and really the result occurs when you've like been doing it so long that you never even really look back at the results.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, whoa, I'm actually really good at this now.
Mm-hmm. I have 2 more questions for you. Do you have 10 more minutes?
Oh yeah.
All right. One is, because most people who go to my website are really interested in finger training. And I'm curious if your thoughts on training fingers have changed at all in the past decade.
Well, we can pick up blocks now, which is cool. They didn't have like the tension block or the nug available, and I think that those are really cool, especially because one of the bigger complaints of hangboard training for fingers is shoulder pain, and so being able to adjust what we're doing there is important. I think that climbers underutilize general grip training. We get really good at holding these really specific positions. But if I said, like, we're going to train your legs, I'm just going to have you hold 90 degrees and we're going to get super, super strong at 90 degrees, and that's all we're going to do, you'd be like, that's kind of crazy. But that's sort of what we do. And so we get good. And sometimes we hold open hands. Sometimes we're really crimped in, but we're always holding static positions. But in practice, we're very often like rolling up onto something or catching it and opening. And so I think it's important to do some general grip stuff. Squeezy grippers, wrist curls, heavy finger rolls, all that stuff, it can be useful. It's not like it needs to take up an inordinate amount of your time, but you can expand your brain beyond just finger grip positions on the boards.
Are
Uh,
you seeing that translate into people's climbing?
I see it translate in terms of finger health and lack and reduction in injury. The main thing is like, if I'm only strong in one position, then I can be really weak in all those other positions, and I'm still going to try hard at the crag and blow a finger or whatever. And so I think that's useful. I think it should be something that kind of simmers along. But we also have a really high focus now on mega intense, what we would call finger power training, which is like moonboard training, where you're catching these things dynamically and really loading them quickly. So there's a high chance of injury there. So I think it's important to marry like some controlled strength training in the fingers with this more dynamic component. The Beast Making book is phenomenal. If people haven't read it, Ned Fiali's book is a really great way of addressing a lot of like combining bouldering and finger strength training, which it's really good.
He has a book? The
Yeah,
Beast Making book?
Beast Making. Yeah,
Oh, I
awesome.
need to
Yeah,
check that out.
you can go. Yeah, go buy it. You can use my code Steve10 and save 10%. No, um, I,
Is
I
that
think,
true?
I think it's fabulous. No, it's a joke. I
Okay.
think it's a fabulous book, though, and everybody should buy it. And
Okay.
I think it's available. Vertebrate Publishing puts it out, but I think you get it on Amazon. So
Okay. Yeah, I'll check it out. My last question is about your personal climbing and training. Like, in the past 10 years, you've gotten older. We all have, obviously. And I'm curious because I think a lot of people wonder about this. I mean, so I would like to know what has changed in your training and climbing, and like where you're at with things.
yeah. Well, let's see. Since we talked, I sent my hardest route ever after we talked. We talked in 2014, and so then I sent my hardest climb ever when I was 47. Um, and so that was cool. Like, but it wasn't like anything special in preparation. It was like found a project, trained specifically for it, spent a lot of time on it, sent it. Um, but I do find now I have a harder time with just general capacity. And so I'm doing more like low intensity, continual, like making sure we get out and hike or ski or stuff during the day, the rest days and stuff, like low intensity endurance. Especially because that, like, a lot of what I like to do is like exploring new crags and like I said, hunting and things like that. So just generally the ability to go out and do stuff and keep up with our kids. Um, and then as far as climbing goes, I do a lot more like, um, well, I wouldn't say I do more, but I still am focusing on maintaining muscle mass and explosiveness, the ability to move quickly, because that's something that we notice as we get older. Is just like balance goes, the ability to like jump down a boulder fields feels like it goes away, and so really trying to address that with some explosive movement. I still love to boulder, and so but one of the things that is happening, and it's not super cool, is that I'm getting less and less time to climb, and I'm trying to like turn that around. But we've been really busy at work, so um, but I still try to get out a couple of days a week, and then you know once I get rid of these kids and they graduate from high school, it's game on. So I'm going to be set.
Keep on.
So
So,
oh yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No, is
Oh,
anything else changed with your training or anything?
well, yeah, a really important aspect that we've been paying a lot of attention to and studying is really the value of aerobic endurance training for climbing. Um, and when I talk about aerobic endurance training, it's really like we should look at it as low intensity climbing or high volume climbing. And Joel Unema came up with a really great analogy for this, or an image of this. And he basically drew it out as these two buildings. And you've got your like strength and power building, and then you have your endurance building here. And then there's a cable between those two buildings, and that's your power endurance. And the only way to get your power endurance where you need it is to either increase the strength and power building height or increase the aerobic endurance building's height. And if both of those buildings go up, power endurance will just follow. And but I can't like raise power endurance above what my aerobic capacity is or my strength capacity. And that's sort of what we've done with this fatigue seeking training that people do when it comes to power endurance time. And it's really interesting because if I said, okay, Neely, we've flown to Spain and we've wanted to come to this crag for 6 months and we're finally here. Let's see how quickly we can get pumped and wrecked and then get out of here. You would be like, that's crazy. I want to try to ascend this route. And so I'm going to try to do as much climbing as I can without getting fatigued. But then when we go to the gym, we flip that script and we're like, how quickly can I get super duper pumped? And if you wanted, I could give you a power endurance program or whatever that just destroys you in like less than 5 minutes, but it's not going to apply well to climbing. And so that when we come back to Joel's model is the more strong and powerful you are, the more bouldering you do, the more finger strength you build, the less difficult each move on a route might be. I have a lot of friends, like we climb in this killer cave here at Sinks Canyon, and like the hardest climbing in the cave is like maybe V4 moves or something. But for me, I'm like trying pretty hard on those moves, and I have other friends that don't try very hard at all, and so it's not difficult. And if we're climbing on like 5/8 terrain, I can go all day long. And the idea with strength and power training is to pull that level up. The aerobic part is about fueling that system and making it very, very easy for you to continue to bring blood into the system. And so low intensity aerobic climbing, low intensity climbing improves your capillary density, improves the mitochondrial density in the muscles, improves the ability of the muscles to keep processing fuel. And so we can kind of take this aerobic and the strength stuff and squeeze them together with good training to where we're sort of jumping this gap without having to be very good at power endurance. you've been around enough elite climbers that there's not a lot of like fighting the pump going on at the Flottinger cave. They're either aerobic and then they do a really hard boulder and fall off, or they just climb these things. There's not a lot of people like fighting this screaming pump as much as there are those of us that are sort of in the middle ground, climbing at the gallery at Red Rocks and trying to like fight our power endurance there. The elite level climbers are so strong and they have such highly developed aerobic systems that they can jump between being aerobic, low intensity on quite hard terrain, go and do very, very hard movement, and then come back to aerobic. Because nobody lives in that anaerobic or that cable between the two buildings zone. We can improve that a little bit, but these other two are really, really critical.
That's so interesting. So you're like getting more away from 4x4s and classical power endurance training.
And it's not bad to like top that up to peak with it, but it's really hard to sustain. Here's the thing: if I'm doing a lot of power endurance, it wrecks you, and so it's not hard enough to make me more powerful, and it's not because I can't do 4x4s at my limit. But I can't go very long either. I can't do a huge long session, so I don't build very much capacity. And so the value of that is really like the value of power endurance training is getting good at handling being pumped. The value of these other two training is getting good at not getting pumped in the first place. And so if we can do that and then have the power endurance ability, but it doesn't take much to get that, and then go back to these bases of a lot of volume. And you've seen it. You've been to enough of these crags where you're like, oh my God, these really high level elite climbers do a lot of climbing.
A lot of climbing, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like 3 pitches a day, and that's it's a hard pill to swallow for those of us that are really, really busy. But I think it's a really critical aspect. If your capacity feels like it sucks, like you just can't get a bunch of pitches in. If you can't get a bunch of pitches in, you're not going to get a bunch of climbing in. If you're not going to get a bunch of climbing in, you're not going to get good endurance, right? And so that's a really important thing. What level can I get more activity in and maintain some level of capacity? And so that's been a big part of our programming and my own personal programming as well, which has been really nice because then I can kind of go out and do whatever. Most of my climbing partners are like 30. And so it's, I got to train hard just to be able to approach. So that's good.
That's really cool. It's kind of relieving to think of doing more aerobic work and less power endurance work to keep your power endurance up.
Well, and it's funny, like it takes a lot. But it's like we've said, like, building endurance is boring, but having it isn't. And I think that's the thing is like, try it out. Like, even if you're just in a bouldering gym, let's add a little bit of volume at the end of the day. That's very, very low intensity. The very, very low intensity part is critical. We don't want to be in that pump zone. It needs to be aerobically driven. And so when we look at that, we're looking for specific markers. Those specific markers include I could breathe nasally. My respiration is very, very low. Like, I could keep my mouth closed and still keep moving. I could have a conversation during that, you and I, during our first pitch at the crag. So if I can keep, if you and I are just climbing up and down on V1s and V0s, you and I could just have a full conversation. If we go into 4x4s, there's no more talking. And so we need to not get into this pump zone. The other thing is always feeling like you could have done more. And one of the classics is the route 4x4 workout there. And so that's routes. You can do it on auto belay or routes at your gym. And I would recommend anybody that tries it on the easiest climbs they can find in the facility. I've seen so many athletes blow it and start out way too hard. But we had some guys that were 514 climbers that tried to start on a 511C, and that was way, way too hard. Wow. The 4x4 workout, route 4x4s is this. I do a pitch, and then I top rope it 3 times right afterwards. And then you do it, and you do it 3 times right afterwards. So it's about, maybe it's somewhere like between 10 and 20 minutes of me climbing, then you climb, and then we do that 4 times. And so we each get 16 pitches in, which is maybe like way more pitches than you've done in the last 3 weeks, which is maybe an indicator that capacity is something that you could work on.
But all of those pitches need to be like you having a conversation level.
Totally. Like for me, it'd be like 5.8.
Yeah.
But what am I training? I'm not training my ability to climb hard stuff. I'm trying to develop my aerobic capacity. It's the same thing. I'm not expecting climbing performance to go through the roof when I'm stretching or when when I'm eating. What I'm doing there is working on other parts of it. And really what we're doing here is working on aerobic development.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do it through non-specific modes, but we really need that forearm development. So if I was less specific than climbing, maybe like cross-country skiing or swimming or air bike stuff might be appropriate because I'm still using my upper body. And when we go to like cycling or running, we're really not using the upper body. And so we're only developing part of the endurance system.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it's not important to have a good, strong heart and lungs. But as we said in our first interview, running is not an essential step in getting good at endurance rock climbing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminds me that my husband is really into rowing and he swears by it for his endurance with climbing. Like he started doing it and he'll do these 40-minute sessions at like zone 2.
Yeah.
And then he'll go climbing and he's like, I'm not getting pumped. And so he was clearly just like raising his aerobic
Totally.
capacity.
Yeah, I had that same experience. I coached this Australian professional climber, Doug McConnell, and he found the same thing at Santolini. It was his back was getting tired more than his forearms. And so we did a series maybe 3 years ago of like rowing stuff that really helped develop some of that endurance. But we have a flashboard. We got Will England to send us a bunch of these like seconds, like BLIMs flashboards. And we took the handle off the rowing machines and put the flashboards on there. So you can pull on an edge while you're rowing.
That's a good idea. Oh, I'm going to tell him that.
But low intensity, it's like I can go 5, 8, 10 minutes without getting pumped, but I'm just in that little bit more specific position. Mm-hmm. And there's some amount of interest in it. And like I said, we don't have scientific proof that this stuff works, but we talked about that 3-legged stool of science where it's sort of like theory and empirical evidence and then practical application are all parts of it. And so just because it's like not in the Journal of Sports Medicine, it might be something worth trying. And every, buyer beware, like we think it probably works, but it's really important. We're not trying to sell anything. We're just like, hey, this might be a good way to make this happen.
Right. Yeah. So where do you think climbing training is going for the next 10 years?
I think that the smart athlete keeps looking at principles. I think that the really important thing to remember is that we all already know pretty much what to do. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of creating a set of habits and a life situation that allows us to do the right things. And so we'll probably see a lot of people coming out with like crazy gadgets and programs and, here's my 6-week to greater, whatever. But I think it's really important to remember the triangle of constraints. And we've talked about this before. I talked about it at the PCC. And it's like fast, cheap, and effective. And they're each at a corner of this triangle. And with any given intervention, you only get 2 of those. It can be fast and cheap, but it's not going to be effective. It can be fast and effective, but it's not going to be cheap. And it can be cheap and effective, but it's not going to come very fast. And so it's really important to keep thinking in those terms. If anybody's promising you all 3, they're lying to you. And it's a really important aspect because the power of influencers is very, very high. And the number of people that are taking a supplement or whatever because somebody famous online told them to do it is really, really high. And it's important to just pay attention to that stuff. Mm-hmm. Um, are you sponsored by AG1?
I am. I have chosen to not be.
That's awesome. Did you watch Dave McLeod's video on that?
No, no, but I could make a video on it myself. What did he
Yeah, it's
say?
important. It's important because here's the thing. We are told to buy AG1 to cover all our bases all the time. Joe Rogan tells us, or Andrew Huberman, or whoever, but nobody looks beyond that. And they're just like, oh, that must be important. And so McLeod's videos is a really important thing in that he said, they're small doses of these things. The main things that human beings are deficient in are not present in AG1, and AG1 is really expensive.
Mhm.
AG1, if you take AG1, it's about $2.50, $3 a serving, and so that's a lot for climbers, a lot for most of us. And if you said, instead, I'm going to eat some vegetables and I'm going to eat a wide variety of protein sources and meat and stuff like that, yeah, you're not covering your bases with a powder. But I don't know that is a better option than taking that $2.50 and putting it into the stock market. And like if you just didn't take AG1 and you committed that money to saving, in 20 years, you'd probably have $60,000, $70,000.
Yeah.
Okay. And you could just eat vegetables and meat instead. The really important thing is to look a little bit deeper on those things and just go, is this really important, or is it just Andrew Huberman making a living?
Yeah, exactly. That's
And
what pisses me off about it is that Andrew Huberman, like people trust him, which I don't totally trust him. And so they're like, oh, it must be good. He's a scientist. And then I looked at it and it's like, okay, there are these mushrooms in there, but there's literally there's less than a teaspoon of these mushrooms in there. How can that make any difference? And just what Dave McLeod said about all the
it's tough.
amounts.
I mean, it's hard because people are trying to make a living. You and I both are like, oh man, how are we going to, keep this business rolling? And so if somebody comes along and is like, we'll give you a bunch of money to promote this product, and it's a interesting thing, and that's part of why we've never had any association, even though I've got friends that are in the supplement industry. We just have never associated with it because I want to be able to provide impartial information. I don't mind being sponsored by like a jacket company or something because I'm not selling jackets. But when it comes to selling health products and things like that, it feels disingenuous for a coach to be trying to sell any supplements, any workout tools, whatever. Um, uh, if they're doing so because they're getting paid, like um, you know there's a ton of really great stuff out there, really good tools, all those sorts of things. I think people should be psyched on buying these things, but I think it's really important to like look at it and go, is this really worth the money? Is it going to do what I expect it to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's funny. That came from the question of where's training going in the next 10 years.
Oh,
And basically, what I heard you say is like, think for yourself, don't be dumb, and don't like glom onto influencers because they might be getting paid.
yeah, where one of the other just like final thing on where training is going is the fixed board training is so cool. Like the kilter boards, moon boards, whatever. I mean, it's an amazing resource, and I think that's going to be really influential in what we do. And there's some really cool new products coming out that are similar along those lines. I think in the next 5 years, you're going to be like, whoa, we're really going somewhere with this. And the number one result of putting a moon board in your garage is injury. So take it easy.
Take it easy, chill out. Cool. Well, this has been quite the roller coaster of information, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. And oh man, I'm going to get in trouble. We have a new app coming out.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you, how
I
can people
forgot.
find you? What's going
That's
on with
gonna kill me.
Climbstrong?
No, he's like, don't forget Sale Neely. No, we yeah. So climbstrong.com is our main website. We've got articles there, and then we've got this business relationship with this outfit called Sequence Training over in Australia. They're super cool, and they've got a really great online platform. I've done training plans for years that are on PDFs and Word documents and spreadsheets. and sold them on the ClimbStrong site. And now all of our ClimbStrong direction is headed toward being able to put it on a mobile app and a online platform. So Sequence has really great analytics and things like that. And so I'm taking all of my training plans and pushing them that direction. And so I'm really psyched because we're sort of entering the modern world of what people are capable of with training technology and data and analytics. And it's going to be super cool. So we're moving away from our historical membership model and moving into having people engage with us on that app. We still have our articles and stuff, but they'll all just be free now on the ClimbStrong site.
Oh, you're changing your whole business model. That's crazy.
I just felt like it. I appreciate all the members. They're awesome. We have a really good community, but I really felt like we're underserving them because I'm like, here's another spreadsheet of a workout you can do. And they're all like, so I should print this out and take it to the gym with me. And I'm like, yes, yes, 18-year-old, please do so. And so it's no big deal for somebody like me to like work off a piece of paper. Until I started working with Jake and Dino at Sequence, I was like, notebook forever, man. But it's cool. It's a good app. It's really responsive and it's going to be fun. So yes, we don't do the PDF stuff anymore, and I'm psyched. It's a really good deal. And then I write more than we publish on the ClimbStrong site. And so I just have moved all that writing over to a Substack. So that's kind
Oh,
of
you
where
have a Substack. I don't know what a Substack is. Like, is there a name of yours?
it's Substack's just a blogging platform, but it's just a nice platform because I don't have to do layouts. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And they manage it completely. And so it's just a nice place to like, dump that stuff. They'll do like social media cards if you want to put it on your social media. I don't do that myself, but I just am thinking about a lot of stuff, and I like try some workouts, telling old stories or whatever. And so I tend to engage with writing more than with other stuff. And so that's where I dump all that stuff.
So, like, if I wanted to find it, I would just search your name or something.
Yeah, it's substack.com slash at Steve Bechtel.
Okay.
But I think I think there's a link to it on our new ClimbStrong site. So.
Okay, and with the Sequence training app, if people can just sign up for that on your site, or do they have to go to Sequence or something?
Yeah, no, you can go to climbstrong.com. There's a link. Go check it out there. And so it's really exciting. I'm hoping to be able to keep the ball rolling with technology. I still am like I'm still working on books, even though people don't read them anymore.
I
And
read
so
books all the time.
I know, but you're a rarity, right? And so when I'm like, oh yeah, I got this sick new bouldering book coming out, and I appreciate the half dozen of you that buy it. Um, yeah,
Come on.
yeah, no, like my friend Zach Sawyer buys all the books, and that's it. I think he's the only person that's ever read them all, so that's good.
Okay. And then lastly, people can sign up to work with your coaches on Climb Strong.
Mhm.
And do you have any clinics or anything coming up?
Boy, the only thing I've got scheduled so far this year is I'm teaching at the CWA in Salt Lake City. It's in the middle of April. But the as you know, the in-person clinics got funny with COVID, and then we just have never really kind of gotten our feet back on the ground with that. But I would like to make it happen again because it's so fun to teach in person, and it's so revealing when you get to actually be in the same room with somebody and you're like, oh, okay, this is something we can work on with your climbing. Because we can have people that test out really well and then they just don't have shoes that fit or something like that. No, it's true. It's totally happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, cool. All right,
Awesome.
I'm gonna let you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Keep up the good work. And I think the most important thing in the last 10 years is that we're both still standing, which is cool.
We're both still standing, both still walking, climbing. Good
Yeah.
job, us. All right, talk to you later.
All right.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Steve Bechtel. If you want to train with any of his coaches or do any of his online training programs or get any of his books or just read any of his blogs, you can go to climbstrong.com, and also you can read more from his Substack. So that's all I've got for you on that. If you need any help with your climbing training, remember we have so many resources for you here that have been curated for the past over a decade. So many blog posts to learn from, tons of podcast episodes. We also have coaches, Alex Steiger and Matt Pincus, who are Alex is not taking new clients right now. Matt is for the next couple weeks, and then he's going to be on a wait list. So if you want to get in with one of our coaches, go to trainingbeta.com/Matt, and you can work with him. Otherwise, we have online programs that Matt actually created for bouldering and for route climbing. And those are subscription programs that you pay monthly for. And then we also have some ebooks. You can find all of that at trainingbeta.com under the training tab. And then, of course, I offer nutrition and mindset coaching for climbers, and you can find all of it at trainingbeta.com. You can always find us on Instagram at trainingbeta. And I love getting especially positive reviews for the podcast. And if you ever have any suggestions or comments, you can always email me at info@trainingbeta.com. All right, thanks for listening all the way to the end, and I'll talk to you next time.